right, so we have another episode of Bootcast today. I'm joined with Richard Owen, my good friend. I've known Richard for almost 5-6 years. I've competed with him. I think I competed with him, but I don't think he thinks I competed with him. And of course, my co-host Romy Mahajan. Richard, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here.
Awesome. So you invented NPS 15 years ago, and now you're reinventing NPS. Tell us more about OXC Cognition.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, first of all, I mean, I think that my team invented NPS. One hates to think of yourself as being sort of the sole source of this, as much as anyone can invent anything. I think NPS was, by most people's estimation, I think a tremendous success, right? It broadly adopted. I think it got a lot of focus and attention on CX. I think that when you look back now over, what's approaching, 20 years since the concept was advanced, I think at the same time, we have to be a bit sober in understanding how far companies have come in terms of actually improving their customer experience. And I think the results are more disappointing than I think we'd like. For a lot of companies, measuring NPS and talking about customer experience has become a bit of a bromide. You say you do it, you might publish some numbers. It doesn't change. Worst case, it might even be the wrong set of numbers, and it might just be there to pay people a bonus. And so from our perspective, there really has to be something more. And like a lot of companies, we're taking advantage of what I think is a sort of next generation set of technologies that are being developed as part of machine learning technologies to really, I think, try and take the whole concept of Net Promoter Score up to the next level. So that's our focus.
Got it. And from what I understand, you've kind of like, you're starting this company, you didn't go back to Sutter Ventures and, raised money. You're just kind of doing it yourself this time around. Tell me a little the background.
Assuming they'd have me.
That's funny.
I think first of all, as you know yourselves, I mean, there's sort of multiple choices entrepreneurs have, right? At some level, you can start a business with third-party capital, and that used to be impossible 20 years ago. Entrepreneurs bootstrap businesses and then raise money. And it's only recently, I would argue, that you had companies raising capital, lots of capital on a PowerPoint. And that can be quite appealing to an entrepreneur. But you always have to remember there's a bit of an asymmetry between what a professional investor wants and what the entrepreneur wants. The professional investor is playing a portfolio game, and the entrepreneur is playing a portfolio of one. Yeah. And so I think that we're going to learn that looking at the stats and the failure rates, we're going to learn that for a lot of companies, taking capital too soon, taking too much capital, actually represents too high a risk for the entrepreneur. It's an asymmetry of risk. It's something that works pretty well for the VC, but not necessarily well for the entrepreneur. And we're in an era where there's been too much capital chasing too few deals, I would argue, in the venture community. And that usually means decreased returns for limited partners. So it'll be interesting to see, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, whether we look back and say it was a golden age for venture-backed companies or actually a terrible time to be taking and investing venture capital.
Got it. And so this time around, you are kind of like obviously bootstrapping it, kind of building it out. Obviously, you had a good exit with set metrics to nice. So tell us a little bit. Let's jump right into it. Tell us a little bit about OXC Cognition. What's kind of what's your kind of rethink of the CX kind of vision? I mean, I think you have a bold vision. I mean, obviously, I know you. I read it. It's a bold vision. I'm behind it. Tell us all a little bit more.
Well, I think the simple premise is this. There's the biggest challenge facing customer experience professionals is that their data is extremely limited. And what we all want is we want data on every customer every second. We'd like to understand the health of every one of our customers. We'd like to understand if something terrible happens to one of our largest accounts yesterday, why, what happened, can we act on it? And we've been anchored in this universe, which you guys very well understand, which is the only source of data we can use almost exclusively has been survey data. And it's certainly the business model that we used at SatMetrics. And that the problem with that model is that the fundamental boat anchor for that is always the participation of customers in the process. And at the very best, really, really well executed survey programs, get data from customers maybe twice a year, and they get maybe data for 20 to 30% of their customers. And I'm talking about business to business. B2C would probably be a lot lower than that. And so saying that you get twice a year snapshots of a customer and only 30% of your customers to boot isn't exactly sort of, 2020 levels of data that you'd expect in almost any other business. So we've worked really for a couple of years to try and find a solution to the problem. And it turns out that the solution was staring us right in the face. Number one, surveys are really, really useful, but they're really, really useful for calibrating machine learning engines that are really, really useful at predicting where customers are. So instead of saying my survey is the only source of data, my survey becomes a great way to teach a machine to predict what customers are actually going to be thinking.
And I have a question here.
Yeah.
I have a quick question here. So are you looking at behavioral data to make the prediction, operational data? What kind of data does a customer have to give you?
Because at the end of the day, you need a data source that is responsive, right? Because if you're going to predict off it, it needs to be responsive. Yep. So the responsive data set essentially is the operational data set. So it's really the data exhaust for companies. A lot of good jargon there. Let's make it really simple. Every time in most companies, a customer incurs some sort of experience, they leave a footprint digitally in that company, right? Something occurs. You ship them a product. Well, you knew you shipped them a product. They take delivery of it. Oh, it arrived. It turns out that, as we know, customer journeys are made up of thousands of these events, but a relatively small number of them turn out to be massively influential in whether customers are promoters or detractors. So within that entire universe of data, the challenge is to figure out the ones that really matter, to figure out how to calibrate them, and to figure out how to teach a machine to say, which might be entirely obvious, look, if you ship the product late, the likelihood the customer's a promoter just dropped, right? And so very simple level, you're teaching machines to solve those problems in a bit more of a sophisticated fashion.
So I have a quick question. Richard, you talked about NPS and measurement of that being sort of a bromide, a thing that people do and sort of pretend that they go through the performative act, but it doesn't really necessarily mean anything. I do have a larger question that might seem a little heretical, but when you think about experience, customer experience, and you think about measurement, right? When I experience something, I'm not trying to experience something that should be necessarily measured. So if you have to reduce an inchoate, emotional thing into data, are we talking at cross purposes here? Is experience actually, should it not be measured, right? Or am I crazy?
Look, I think that as a practical matter, the way corporations get their arms around their operations and take action is through measurement. And whether we like it or not, whether it's the best way of doing things, which I think is a legitimate debate, it's the way in which the command levers of companies get executed. I mean, I think that if you're the CEO of a large, complex organization, how do you get 10, 20, 30,000 employees to move in a direction, right? We can do strategy decks. But the fact is, we have sort of perhaps the equivalent of military command and control systems, and we have that through measurement. And we have that through goal setting. We have that through incentive management that ties. And I think that if we ignore that as the instrumental factor behind execution, I think we are unable to sort of control companies. Now, you raised another really interesting point, which is that we shouldn't presume that measurement is the entire limit of our imagination here, right? I don't think it is possible to make it the dominant and single purpose behind the way we think about customer experience for a couple of reasons. First of all, it can't be inclusive enough of all the elements that make up what's a good experience to be able to give you a great result. Second problem is there is a unquestionable creative element to how companies formulate experiences. I think this is true of any technology problem, though. What do computers do really well? Let's be buzzy about this. What does artificial intelligence do really well versus human intelligence? artificial intelligence does a really good job of managing complex sets of data to give humans ideas and to give them direction. Humans do a fantastic job of taking very difficult problems that are poorly defined and require tremendous creative input and building on that.
Right.
So I look at this as, how do you provide data sets that enable humans and inspire humans to make creative decisions and create breakthroughs? And I think that's actually where a lot of AI is going to go. I think AI is going to be less about replacing human decision-making and more about augmenting it.
Yeah, so I'm with you. At Quantierian, we think about, in the old language, man plus machine, but now we think about it as human plus machine, of course, in a much more sensible language. But I would agree with you fully that there's an art and a science, and it's all sort of jumbled together. So beautifully said. Thank you.
Well, and also, look, we're talking about weak AI here, right? So to some degree, we're not here making an argument for strong AI anyway. That's not, and let's face it, probably 90% of what people are talking about in terms of investable AI today is weak AI.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Got it. And Richard, I want to switch gears a little bit. You talk a lot about, like, how CX, and you've had a deep kind of understanding of the CX business over the last 20 years, realistically. And from an organization's perspective, do you think like big organizations or even mid-market organizations are ready to kind of say, we're gonna stop doing what we were doing for 14 plus years, 18 plus years, or any number, pick a number realistically, and say, like, we are gonna really dig into our own data sets, kind of try to kind of map it to machine models, and then calibrate it. What's your take on kind of on their kind of ability even kind of to rethink themselves?
Well, I think there's two things for this, two aspects to that. First of all, let's acknowledge that we are in a unique moment of time when a lot more things are possible than were possible 6 months ago.
True.
I was on a panel with a group of financial executives 2 weeks ago from big banks in North America, very conservative organizations, and they were expressing close to disbelief at the degree to which their organizations had opened up the checkbooks to invest in digital transformation. I mean, these were career veterans saying, we've never seen anything like it in 20 years at insert big bank name here. And so all bets are off. And I think that's the first thing, unique moments in time. Having said that, if history is any guide, we're going to see a curve. We're going to see a group of companies lead the way, be transformative. Some of them will succeed and achieve great results. Others will maybe fail. We'll see a conservative group of companies that will not, that may even just go to the wall before they change, either because they can't or they won't. And that's played out with every technology transformation, or frankly, back to the Industrial Revolution, right? So I think we can't generalize and say, will business all change? To answer your question directly, there will be leaders, there will be laggards. I think we are probably going to see more experimentation and more leaders, because no leadership team can sit around and say the world hasn't changed. I mean, you can't.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, obviously you started, I obviously have a private knowledge to you. You launched the company literally on March, the first week of March, I guess. Literally, like, you launched a new business literally the first week of March, right? When things were going into lockdown mode, or in the beginning of this kind of pandemic, or kind of beginning of the realization of the pandemic, quite frankly. But that didn't stop you, right? I mean, I think this is you make a great point around, like, transformation and change is in the air, even in mid to large companies, which was not there 6 months ago. And so you can tap on that.
Right. Sorry, go ahead, Romy.
Sorry, about your go-to-market, because I would assume, and I've known you since your Satmetrics days, and obviously an amazing company, and so on and so forth. You work only with top executives. I mean, because the change has to start there. In other words, the work you're doing, isn't it much more around strategic, cultural approach, process approach to CX more than anything? So, are you only working really with CEOs, or am I wrong here?
So I think it might have been the presumption of ours that, it would be something that we'd work more closely with CEOs around. What I find still true about the CX industry is that CEO sponsorship is essential, but engagement is often more limited. So, what tends to happen when this works well is, the CEO finds a proxy within the leadership team that is somebody who has a burning, but I think, frankly, a passion for it. I don't think too many of these people are sort of just arm's length. They have a passion, belief for CX. But I think more importantly, they have that clear role where they are a business person, and CX is a weapon to accomplish a business objective. One of the things I was reflecting on the other day with a group of CX leaders was there are really three types of CX professionals emotionally, or more accurately, perhaps everyone's a hybrid of the three, a combination. One attribute is almost the religious crowd. I got into CX because I'm on a moral crusade. This is something we need to go fix. The second group got into it because they love surveying. I'm not joking. I mean, this is why they're in it, right? They're survey authors. Right. And they define their existence by, I think it's really fun to write surveys and collect survey data. And the third group I would characterize as basically all about business. At the end of the day, CX is just another tool, but I'm all about, EBITDA growth, cross-sell, upsell, retention reduction. And you could argue the perfect leader for anything like this is a mix of the three. The issue is our challenge in the CX community too often is we've got too much overweighted towards the religious side. We've got people who are in it for the moral reasons and not the business reasons. And the CEOs, to your point, are in it for the business reasons.
And the CEOs, and I've had great conversations with chief operating officers, not necessarily always the CEOs, but second, like you said, like a proxy or some guy, like a VP, or sometimes even the VP of finance is like, dude, I think you've kind of described it perfectly, right? The right person is who uses CX as a weapon to do something else, really, which is EBITDA or revenue
money
growth.
Talks. I'm constantly amazed these conversations you have where people frame this constantly as, again, a moral issue, right? We have to love our customers because we have to love our customers, right? I appreciate that sentiment. On the other hand, that's not the boardroom. And frankly, it shouldn't be the boardroom, right? We do have corporations legally with a fiduciary responsibility to generate shareholder returns. They're owned by shareholders. So we have to speak the language of business, and we need to, I think, candidly grow up a little bit in the CX community and start realizing if we can't show financial impact, why should anyone invest their time and energy in us, right? They can write a page in the annual report saying, we love our customers, they're at the center of our organization, blah, blah, blah. But if we want to put resources behind transformation of CX, we'd better start showing that equals significant delta to the bottom line. And that requires a different approach, I'm afraid.
Right. What about I know Vivek is doing some work here, and Richard, I believe you are as well, around if you take the metaphor of if you're a large company, your employees are your customers, and you use CX mentality or methodologies to make your employees happy. Is that an end in itself, or does that also have to be tied to financials?
I do believe it's not an end in itself. I do believe at the end of the day, look, I think it's interesting. There was this hot debate, sort of dropped out the news with COVID. But if you remember a year ago, you had the likes of Jamie Dimon out there talking about stakeholder capitalism, right? And, should capitalism be all about, returns to shareholders? And let's go, Milton Friedman, cover your ears, stop turning in your grave. It's gone. What I would say about it is this. I think it is, to use a bit of a cliche, a false choice to think about getting engaged employees, delighting customers, and making profits. I don't understand why we think of that as a trade-off. In fact, I'd make a different argument. Every successful, high-performing, profitable business is characterized by engaged employees, by engaged customers and delighted customers, and high profits. And if you think about it, if you said one of those three wasn't true, well, how is that business doing so well? If it's not profitable, the shareholders will get sick of it anyway. You have a whole bunch of happy employees, but they'll be unemployed employees pretty soon. If the customers aren't engaged, well, you won't have a growing business. You won't have profits. If the employees are not engaged, then you cannot generate either happy customers or more profits. So I think it's a three-legged stool that we have to stop thinking of as being choices and see as being common characteristics of success, all three. Now I think one thing we do get fooled by is this notion of employee satisfaction. I think we're a little cautious here, right? I'd be very satisfied if people paid me to do nothing.
Right.
I could really enjoy my job if I barely had any stress and didn't have to work at all and had great benefits, Engaged employees are somewhat different in the sense that they are aligned with the company mission, the mission for customers, the mission for profits, and they contribute in that way. So I'm big on employees, but I'm concerned that too many HR departments start with a very simplistic premise, which is how do we make sure our employees are happy, as opposed to how do we make sure that they are engaged and contributing.
Yeah, and you follow the money trail. I mean, I can see that where if you are the head of HR, you don't give a shit about customers, you care about employees, and there's a kind of a focus on employee experience, focus on employee engagement, and then the CX guys come in we don't care about the other stuff, and then the CEO and the COO is like, well, neither of you guys don't give a shit about. We gotta have a board meeting in 3 days. we have to do the financial part really. So I think it's a good way of describing all three components contribute to the CX kind of ecosystem, and instead of everybody covering their bases and saying that this is the only game, right? That's what ends up happening. This is the only game in town. So because obviously they're trying to sell a product or a service, or they're trying to sell their vision of what it should be. And I've talked to even HR leaders oh, well, all you need to do is to get all your employees happy, everything will be fine. I'm like, well, I ask any CEO, I'm like, yeah, I mean, they may say that, but realistically they need to report to the board too. That's a good way of the three-legged stool is a good way of describing it.
The issue is whether we can agree or disagree about these axioms is attribution. How do you attribute some financial outcome to customer experience or customer satisfaction or customer engagement or employee engagement, right? It's that attribution cycle, the proof piece, which I think is the bugaboo here.
Yeah. Well, and look, you're a great marketer, so you understand the irony there, right? Marketing has exactly the same problem.
Exactly.
I think that it's easy to sort of draw the facts sort of post ante, where we say, look, companies that are really successful, let's take a look at them and go, wow, they have characteristics like great customer loyalty, right? And I feel like, in general in business, that's as close as we typically get. We look at successes and we try and look post ante at why they are successful, and we draw conclusions about their characteristics. And if you guys have been involved in really successful businesses, and so when you're really successful, there's a whole combination of factors that go into that success.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I can tell you randomized shit happens.
And trying to sort of parse them out and say, well, it was, let me say that it was all about this. It just isn't the reality. So I think that, as you know, I'm a big English Premier League fan, and as you know, Liverpool won the Premier League for the first time in 30 years. I grew up in Liverpool, so this was a big deal. But to win in a sport like that, you got 11 players on the field, 10 in the goalie. Saying well, was it all down to the striker? No, you didn't have 9 other field players and a great striker. That didn't do it. You essentially have bench, you have team strength, and I think in a corporation, think of those players as functional and operational assets they have. And if they all come together, if there's enough strength, companies perform incredibly well. Now, I think customer experience, I think the analogy falls over, because I think customer experience is probably one of 5 or 6 things that companies really need to do well to be successful, but it's not on its own.
I would agree. The only example in business I've ever seen in terms of direct attribution is Vivek's success after meeting me.
Right. And I think that is the case study that we all tend to think of.
Yes.
There you go. On that note, that's a funny note, but on that note, Richard, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great conversation. We'll thank you so much again.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Seeing your company grow and prosper.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Richard. Bye-bye.